What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. The Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice has accepted a 6-game suspension for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy and will start serving the suspension at the beginning of the season. Elsewhere in the NFL, the Colts say they will not trade Anthony Richardson despite naming Daniel Jones the starting quarterback. Coming up on the big show today, we'll be catching up with Oregon State outside linebacker Nico Taylor, also quarterback Malik Murphy, Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers, and Beavers Edge writer Ryan Harlan. On the big show today, you've got the Rip City Drive on a Wednesday. Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Personally, it's nice to see the sun creeping out amidst the kind of hazy, cloudy skies we had the last couple days, and we're getting a little closer to the start of the college football season. At least week one, anyway. Week zero underway this past weekend, but the real nitty gritty of college football getting underway this weekend and even as early as tomorrow as we have some Thursday night games as well. But welcome to the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter with you here today. We got a lot to get into on the big show coming up in about 20 minutes. We'll be catching up with Oregon State outside linebacker Nico Taylor. Nico Taylor was the Beavers' top edge rusher a year ago. He's back for another season this year and looks to play a crucial role in the Beavers' attacking defensive scheme. And got a chance to catch up with him a little bit earlier, so we'll be hearing that interview. And then, in case you missed it yesterday, we'll be catching up with Malik Murphy as well, Oregon State starting quarterback for the year, and getting his thoughts on the Saturday night opener against the Cal Bears. A little bit later, we'll be catching up with Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers. And in the final hour, we'll be catching up with Beavers Edge writer Ryan Harlan, getting the latest from Oregon State's media availabilities this week. Beavers offense met with the media yesterday, defense today, Trent Bray earlier this week, and we'll be excited to get ready for Oregon State's matchup against Cal, which is quickly approaching, and it's going to be a dandy of a contest. I think the point spread being 3 points in favor of the Beavers, which one could say is a coin toss. Like, they usually say a 3-point spread is indicative of the home field advantage. So you take away the home field advantage and you're near neutral. So I think it's going to be a great game. I think you're going to have some typical first game, issues, maybe some penalties, some sloppy play, maybe a turnover or two that's ugly, maybe a special teams blunder. You never know. But I think from both Cal and Oregon State will be a certain amount of feeling it out from each other respectively. And ultimately, we'll see how that game comes to be. So that's pretty much the plan for today, getting you guys ready for that. We'll also be talking some college football, kind of starting to preview the schedule this weekend. Obviously, the big game on tap is the Fox game. Texas and Ohio State from Columbus this year, with the Longhorns coming in as the preseason number one team and the reigning national champion Buckeyes coming in at number 3. Interesting little twist on that game. Some news that came on today is that Dave Portnoy, who many of you may know is a figure here at Barstool Sports, and recently started a partnership with Fox, and he was supposed to be on the staff for the Big Noon kickoff and everything leading up to the game, but recently learned Portnoy, who is a Michigan alum, was not welcomed at Ohio State and won't be going to the game on behalf of that crew. So there's an audio clip from Dave. We'll maybe get into that a little bit later as well. But some more great college football games as we kind of preview the weekend beyond just what we have here locally. And obviously the Oregon Ducks take on Montana State at Autzen Stadium. So that's going to be a game we kind of get into as well. And we'll take a look around the Pacific Northwest, see what the Cougs are up to, see what the Huskies are up to, get you guys fully covered for the college football slate. But before we do, we're going to start today with a little bit of our NFL audio roundup, as got some interesting things kind of going on in the NFL right now. The biggest one was former Oregon Duck quarterback and Texas Tech quarterback Tyler Shuck was named or was not named the starting quarterback. It was Spencer Rattler down there in New Orleans. However, head coach Kellen Moore had some things to say about Tyler Show that we want to get into, and then also on his choice to name Spencer Rattler the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. We caught up with Dan Pizzuta yesterday, NFL writer, and I found it interesting that when I asked him to kind of examine the two teams or a few teams that he thought would kind of be near the bottom this year, and I kind of threw out the Colts, thinking that I think the Colts were going to be not so great, and he was real quick to throw out the Browns and Saints. So it could be a rough year down in New Orleans, in addition to Cleveland. But Cleveland, you just kind of expect it at this point. But we'll hear from Kellen Moore on his quarterback situation. We also got some audio from Dak Prescott. Earlier in the week, I obviously had my little Cowboys spiel here on this program, and would very much like to see how it's going to ultimately come down for the Cowboys and Micah Parsons, that negotiation. So we'll hear from Dak with that coming up as well. And then last but not least, some audio from Aaron Rodgers. I know that now Aaron Rodgers is just kind of that enigma that, at least for me, just kind of won't go away. I'm curious to see ultimately how he does for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. His time with the Jets didn't particularly go well as far as not only injury, but then just inconsistent play. Robert Saleh being out, all that, just it was a mess, right, in New York. And I like to see anybody, kind of have that twilight year. And I think Rodgers still has plenty to give to the game, but physically, I'm not sure what, like the saying goes, not everybody ages like Tom Brady, right? It's almost just like he was the only guy that could make playing and winning a Super Bowl at, 44, 45, like particularly easy. Because here we are talking about Aaron Rodgers being, somewhat physically not what he was. He's only 41. So I think it continues to be fascinating how Tom was able to be so effective so deep into his career. But let's go ahead and start with Aaron Rodgers. He spoke a little bit about his time with the Jets despite the struggles.
I wish it had gone differently up there for sure. But, I put all I had into it. I mean, I tore my Achilles and battled my ass back to come back to practice to inspire the guys and hope to come back. I put a lot into it, and I'm sorry it didn't work out, but I'm thankful for the couple special moments that were had.
I think that's pretty telling. Like Aaron Rodgers, almost seems pretty hat in hand there. And it's like, yeah, there's not an awful lot to, ride home about with that stint. I mean, I think even last year the thought was, hey, maybe they could do something. And then ultimately that didn't work out. And they, canned Robert Saleh. And obviously now he's back with San Francisco. And they had the interim coach with Jeff Ulbrich for the rest of the season. That didn't really work out either. So ultimately, and again, we now know, here in Portland with Dame, like, rehabbing an Achilles, not an easy thing to do at all. Probably it's kind of interesting. I've seen someone recently start to say that, it seemed like recently you saw more, or it was historically that kind of the real kind of nail injury that kind of stunk but was seen often were ACLs. Yet lately it really seems like across sports we've seen more of a correlation with Achilles injuries. I'd be curious to kind of look at some data and see if that actually backs it up. But it just seems like lately we've had more Achilles injuries. And you think about Aaron Rodgers, obviously, right? The iconic moment on 9/11 in New York, running out of the tunnel with the American flag. Like, I can still picture that moment. And I think it was play 3 or whatever it was that he tore his Achilles. And who knows how things would have gone for the Jets if that didn't end up ultimately being the case. But now, speaking of which, as we mentioned, Rodgers is 41. He talked about whether or not this year with the Steelers is his final year.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'll reassess all that in the end. But I signed a 1-year contract, so there was, there was nothing about playing longer than 1 year. But we'll see how it goes. Obviously, you'd love to have success and be healthy, and we can start there and have some success, make a run. That'd be really special, and then we'll figure that out come next February.
Yeah, I mean, we know this game from Aaron Rodgers, right? Like, some people are, kind of peeved by it, but, it is what it is. Like, even after a year, I mean, I don't necessarily expect the Steelers to be necessarily Super Bowl contenders, but with Mike Tomlin, you never know what that group can do, and the talent they have on defense, and, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, you never know. I'll be curious to see, DK Metcalf being there is kind of an intriguing notion. But, I think they have a tough road ahead in that AFC, not particularly, I mean, let alone their own division, I should say. But we'll see how that ultimately shakes out. But with Aaron Rodgers, it's like a couple years ago, right? He didn't know if he was going to continue playing or be done. And as far as I know, did that whole darkness retreat down somewhere near Ashland, made lots of famous headlines and came out of the darkness and was like, I'm playing football again. And, I remember a couple months ago when Terry Bradshaw made, some comments about Aaron Rodgers and was like, he needs to just go out to California and speak to the bark. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it was pretty close to what Terry said. And it's like, yeah, Aaron Rodgers kind of does things a little bit differently. He comes to his conclusions in his own way, and he's his personality is kind of zany, I would say. He's never been one of my more favorite dudes that I've pulled for, but at the same token, you recognize game and what Aaron Rodgers has been able to do, going back to his time with Cal, his time with Green Bay. I mean, just on and on and on. The talent's been there. He's achieved a lot, not necessarily the number of Super Bowls that you would expect for a guy that's most likely going to be in the Hall of Fame. But nevertheless, I'm curious to kind of see how this works, because if anybody could kind of get the best out of Aaron Rodgers and kind of put up a perfect situation, maybe it is Mike Tomlin. I mean, I was just having that discussion with my buddy the other day where, he kind of grew up a Steeler fan and more of a Seahawk fan now, but kind of grew up rooting for the Steelers. And I just kind of casually asked him the other day, I'm like, with what he has, how long can you consider, Mike Tomlin an elite coach? And I think along the way, like, he's a really, really good coach, but considering that, Pittsburgh hasn't really been back in that kind of postseason factor in a big way in a handful of years. And, you never know. They've had some quarterback issues since Big Ben left. But heck, I remember when I was in college a handful of years ago when they had their run with, Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, and it was the Killer Bees. Like, those teams were fun. And I can't really say that there's been a Pittsburgh team since that's been necessarily, just a ton of fun to root for. So maybe with Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf, obviously the Seattle connection, maybe there's something to root for this year. And obviously Steelers always play great defense. So there'll be a team that I'm curious to watch this year as well. And before we go ahead and take a break, we'll hear a little bit more from the NFL. Let's switch gears real quick and hear from Dak Prescott on the Micah Parsons situation. And this folks, is interesting because at the end of the day, Dak Prescott, he's a guy that on that team got his money, didn't have any issues negotiating, the contract with Jerry and all that. But as we talked about, that's a tough negotiation. I would argue it's probably the toughest that the Cowboys have had now, outside of perhaps Emmitt Smith. We'll see how long this Micah Parsons hold in, whatever it is, decides to take. But I think, kind of like Dan Pizzuta said yesterday, there's always a chance that the Cowboys could steal the thunder from the Eagles on Thursday night and kind of have something coming Thursday. But let's hear real quick from Dak Prescott, who's, per his words, he's confident Micah Parsons will be back in the fold.
No, I've got confidence. I've told y'all that well way back when, and I'm just going off of experience, honestly. No different than mine, so I've got confidence in that. Just hoping, which I know he is, he's ready to play. There's been a case of something similar to this the last 3 years, I believe. So if not before, I guess, right? Not necessarily. I think that's people can take it however they want. I think it's kind of part of the way guys think and see things around here.
That's Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott. Just reading between the tea leaves there for Dak, it really doesn't seem like there's an awful lot of concern there. And obviously, if you're Dak Prescott, that is the captain of your defense. And if you're Dak, you're obviously wanting to have the Cowboys to get out of the gate strong, have a strong year. And Mike Parsons can be a big part of that. So I almost wonder if what Dan said yesterday, maybe Jerry Jones steals the thunder on Thursday from the Philadelphia Eagles by saying, hey, it's Mike Parsons' extension. We'll see. Anywho, we'll get back here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Oregon State outside linebacker Nico Taylor and quarterback Malik Murphy here on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday so far. We'll be catching up with Oregon State linebacker Nico Taylor here in just a few moments. But before we do, kind of want to give some backstory, obviously, on Nico Taylor and just kind of the almost free extra year that he was able to get because. In case you don't know, Nico Taylor was Oregon State's most effective edge rusher last year, but it was assumed that last year, being a senior, playing in all 12 games, tallied 46 tackles, led the team, 7 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. Again, those tackles for loss, sacks, recoveries, and fumbles forced, he all led the team. And obviously, I think, the high numbers kind of show Oregon State's struggles getting after the passer in the last year, but it was kind of one of those things where it was night and day, like, this guy is one of the better players amidst a defense that is overall struggling. And for the most part, it was, again, assumed that Nico Taylor was out of eligibility. But then, like many other collegiate programs around the country, they took advantage and took notice of what was going on down at Vanderbilt. And after Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavea was able to appeal and basically take to court the NCAA and say, hey, the JUCO year that I played, it shouldn't count towards my 4-year NCAA eligibility. And ultimately he won. And the injunction that was put in place basically was a blanket waiver across all sports last year was, hey, if you at one point in your college career started at a JUCO or a community college, then if you began it, you would automatically get an extra year of eligibility. So in the case of someone like Nico Taylor, who played 2 years at Hutchinson Community College before coming to Oregon State in 2023, he instantaneously, as a result of beginning his career at JUCO, got an extra year. And, to that point, Nico Taylor, I can remember, had put out the graphic that, he was ready to move on. Obviously, he assumed that graduation was going to, he was going to graduate and attempt football at the next level. But then, ultimately was able to get an extra year, come back, play in the defense, play in a defense that should be a lot better in terms of elevating perhaps his exposure for the next level as well. And it turned out to be a huge coup for Oregon State because if you're Trent Bray and you get a guy who you think's graduating who led your team in so many disruptive categories last year, you're definitely going to be excited to have him back. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and bring Nico Taylor onto the program now. Nico, appreciate you joining us here on the Rip City Drive. Just how excited are you for the upcoming season? Oregon State outside linebacker Nico Taylor. Appreciated that conversation, and shout out to Oregon State for helping secure Nico Taylor and Malik Murphy this week. It's always nice to get the players' perspective ahead of the matchup. And again, it's after an Oregon State year that was by all standards down last year. I think there's definitely an interest and a desire for this team to be able to bounce back, have a big year, and win 7, 8, 9 games. I mean, I go back to our conversation a little bit earlier in the week, and I think, as I mentioned, the over under for this team 6.5. Feel pretty confident going over that. I don't think it's going to be a perfect hey, they win all the games they're supposed to win, they lose the ones they're supposed to, and go exactly chalk. Which I think in a Beaver fan's dream, someone could look at the schedule and say, hey, I see 10-2, right? I see 10 potential wins and 2, likely losses to Texas Tech and Oregon. And in a perfect, everything goes Oregon State's way, I suppose you could sell me on maybe the outside chance of it, but I think something more realistic is probably about 8 wins, maybe pushing for 9. The Beavers have had, a couple guys go down with injury that I think would have played a key role right off the bat. I don't want to say that that's going to limit their ability, but, not having guys like Darius Clemens, TJ Crandall, at receiver and defensive back, that's less than ideal. You'd like to have them, and we'll see how everything shakes out. But I go back to our talk earlier in the week where I think the Cal game is going to be a huge determinant of where this football team is. If this team comes out and they're able to beat Cal in week 1, well, shoot, all of a sudden, then some 50-50 games look to be a lot more winnable because you've got the kind of strength at your back, knowing that you took down a Power 4 ACC team in the Bears in week 1. If you drop that game to Cal, then all of a sudden, you're facing down a near winnable game against Fresno State the following week. Fresno State's not quite as good as they were when the Beavers last faced them a couple years ago, but still, ask any Beaver fan, no game against Fresno State is ever, a blowout or without some angst along the way. So even that's not a gimme. And as I mentioned, Oregon State truly doesn't have a gimme on their schedule until almost the middle of the year when they play Lafayette FCS at home. So we're really going to find out what this team is made of early on, and that's where I think the Cal game is going to be a terrific barometer to just see where this team is. If they win that game, I think you could sell me on 8, 9, maybe even higher than that if everything breaks and things kind of go chalk. If they lose that Cal game, it could be closer to 6, 7, maybe that 8 wins. So we'll ultimately see how it shakes out for Oregon State. But in case you missed it, yesterday we caught up with Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy, and we're going to go ahead and replay that interview here now. Again, Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy on the Rip City Drive. That was Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy. Again, Oregon State outside linebacker Nico Taylor, quarterback Malik Murphy. Appreciate both those guys joining us and getting us ready for Oregon State's matchup against the Golden Bears Saturday night at Research Stadium. Go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll continue to dive in more of our NFL audio that we have. We'll continue looking at college football as well. Get you ready for hour number 2. Again, we'll be catching up with Kerry Eggers in hour number 2, and then Ryan Harlan from Beaver's Edge in hour number 3. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Appreciate you tuning in to the first hour of the Rip City Drive. Big thanks again to Nico Taylor and Malik Murphy for joining us last segment. Oregon State outside linebacker and quarterback, getting us ready for Oregon State's matchup against the Cal Bears, 7:30 ESPN on Friday. On Saturday night. So I mentioned earlier an updated spread. So earlier in the week, Oregon State had opened as a 3-point favorite. It's come down. I just pulled it up as of now between our last conversation and this segment, and Oregon State opened as a 3-point favorite, now down to just a 1.5 favorite, which is kind of interesting. So that says a little bit of money coming in on the Cal Bears side of things. So nevertheless, I think we're the money line actually now is even for Cal. So this is close. Like I tell you, folks, like I said earlier, I think you got two teams. I give Oregon State the slight nod being at home, but Cal, I think, has got a strong defense, as they always do under Justin Wilcox. It's going to be a tough matchup, and I think we're going to be due for a good game at Reser. So no going slow out the blocks, folks. It's going to be ready, set, go, 7:30 at Reser Stadium on Saturday. Elsewhere in the Pac-12, got to give Washington State their due as well. The Cougs will also be getting underway from Martin Stadium in Pullman, except they will have an easier start to the season, kicking off with the Idaho Vandals. I say easier. Recently, Idaho has been, better than they had been the last couple of years. Obviously, their head coach of the last few years, Jason Eck, impressed so much that he got the head job at New Mexico after Bronco Mendenhall was hired at Utah State, so kind of the coach carousel spinning there. But nevertheless, interesting connection from Oregon State. After Jason Eck took the position, it was Thomas Ford, Oregon State's running back coach, who was hired as next head coach of the Vandals. So obviously going to be, curious to see how Idaho fares against the Cougs. They got more FBS talent than you might think for that squad. Again, close matchup with Oregon last year where they, gave Oregon some fits as well. So it could be an interesting matchup there on the Palouse as well. And then going elsewhere around the conferences or around the Pacific Northwest, as I mentioned, sliding on over to the Big Ten. We mentioned the Oregon Ducks will be kicking off their season against Montana State at Autzen Stadium, 1 o'clock on Saturday. Expect the Ducks to roll in that matchup. Obviously, Montana State has been one of the stronger FCS teams in recent years. I think back to a couple years ago when Montana State didn't win the national championship in FCS, but I think finished third that year, and Oregon State played them in the non-conference, and the Beavers were still able to handle Montana State pretty easily in that game. That was a fun one out at Providence Park. I kind of wish the Beavers would play a few more games at Providence Park. That was a fun day. But nevertheless, expect Oregon to roll in that matchup. And then elsewhere in the Big Ten and also here in the Pacific Northwest, Washington Huskies are going to be taking on Jay Norvell's Colorado State Rams. So Big Ten future Pac-12 matchup here. Obviously, Colorado State in the Mountain West for another year, but someone that Beaver fans and many future Pac-12 fans are keeping an eye on because the Rams are going to be in that new conference in a few years. And just looking at this matchup, well, obviously Jed Fish's squad, 21.5-point favorites in this game. They are really expected to roll over Colorado State at Husky Stadium. But I'll say this. Jay Norvell and what he's been able to do at Colorado State, they're going to be a sneaky team this year. I'm kind of glad Oregon State doesn't face them this year because last year, that game at Reser Stadium, you kind of saw Colorado State put it all together. And you go back to their schedule last year, and we'll go ahead and pull it up now. But Colorado State kind of got out of the gate slow this last year and not a particularly great start. And then all of a sudden, by the time they played Oregon State, they kind of started to put things together. And after that, they went on a run. So they get blown out by Texas to open the year, and then are 2-2 with wins over Northern Colorado, UTEP, a loss to Colorado, and then a double overtime game against Oregon State. And I've said at the time, I think Oregon State was very lucky to get out of there with a win because Colorado State was starting to put things together. And you look after that, they proceeded to win 5 in a row. They only lost one more time in the regular season and went to the Snoop Dogg Arizona Bowl before losing to Miami of Ohio. But again, I think that spread's a little high. I think Colorado State might be able to, put a little bit of a scare into the Huskies. I don't think much, but much more perhaps than, obviously Montana State could do for Oregon. So that's pretty much the Pacific Northwest rundown this week, and I think all for the most part going to be pretty good games. I mean, I think Oregon, Montana State will probably be the one that rolls, but don't count out Idaho in that game against Washington State. I think that could be a very interesting game on the Palouse at night. We'll see. And then Oregon State Cal, same exact time pretty much. I think that's going to be a great game. So do others, considering it's a nationally televised ESPN matchup. And then, like I said, keep an eye on what happens in Seattle with Colorado State and Washington. I think it'll be a really good indicator of where Jedd Fisch's group is in year two. Obviously, there were some ups and downs from that group last year, but they return a pretty good squad, and I think they're expected to be a bit more of a factor this year than they were last year. So even any Oregon fans that are curious to see how Washington is this year will get a chance to do so when they face off against Colorado State. So, lots of little pieces being moved along the chessboard as we get ready for week one of college football. But as I mentioned, there's some big, big games on tap this weekend, and none are going to be bigger than the Texas-Ohio State game, 9 a.m. On Saturday. Luckily for me, not having to head down to Corvallis until a little bit later in the day, I'll probably get to watch most of that game from Columbus, or not from Columbus, but played in Columbus on my TV, of course. And I think that's going to be a dandy of a game. You look at either one of those teams, a loss with the new college football playoff, it's not going to take either one of the teams out of the college football playoff running. It would put them slightly behind the eight ball, but we've seen you can make moves. In terms of that game, I mean, Arch Manning versus the defending national champs, I mean, I think Texas is a team to be reckoned with this year. If this game was in Austin, I'd be like, hook 'em horns. The fact that it's in Ohio State, it's fascinating. And just like the Oregon State-Cal game, Ohio State just a 1.5 favorite. So they think that's going to be a fantastic game as well. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be getting you into hour two. Continuing on, getting more into the NFL. We'll hear again from Dak Prescott on Micah Parsons. We'll hear what Kellen Moore had to say about the Saints quarterback situation, a few other things as well. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice has accepted a 6-game suspension for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy and will start serving the suspension at the beginning of the season. He will be eligible to return in the Chiefs' 7th game of the year. Elsewhere in the NFL, despite naming Daniel Jones their starting quarterback, Colts GM Chris Ballard says they have no intention and will not trade quarterback Anthony Richardson. So we'll keep an eye on what continues to happen with the Colts. Coming up here on the big show, we'll be catching up with Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers, and a little bit later, Beavers edge writer Ryan Harlan on the big show. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day out there. Appreciate you guys tuning into this edition of the Rip City Drive. Again, we'll be catching up with the Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers here in just a few minutes, talking some Beavers, getting his thoughts on the Blazers as well. Again, if you want to join the conversation, you can reach out to us, 503-248-0620. You want to jump on the air? Got a question for me? I'd love to connect and talk with you. 503-248-0620. Or if you're on social media, if on YouTube, punch up Rip City Radio 620. You can give us a listen there as well, and also jump in on the live chat, drop some comments as well. Rip City Radio 620 YouTube. As promised, I said we'd get back into some NFL audio from the first hour as well that we didn't quite get into. Obviously, we heard Dak Prescott talking about his thoughts on the Micah Parsons deal and whether or not that will ultimately get done. And we also heard from Aaron Rodgers talking about his time with the Jets and whether or not this will be his last season. A couple other things of note we want to check in on, and that's Kellen Moore. Obviously, those of us in the Pacific Northwest very familiar with Kellen Moore, and he's kind of been one of those coaches and players that I've kept an eye on for quite some time. Obviously, the pride of Prosser Washington, played at Boise State and then had a, should I say still the all-time winningest quarterback in college, I might like to add, and carved out a decent playing career, with Detroit and Dallas for a few years, even had a few kind of moments in the sun before settling in as a coach. And I've kind of always watched his coaching career, starting with Dallas as a quarterback's coach, then an offensive coordinator, then moving on to the Chargers and the Philadelphia Eagles as an OC. This last year, obviously, with the Eagles as their offensive coordinator, they win the Super Bowl, and then now gets the New Orleans Saints head job. And for what it's worth, I know New Orleans comes with its own sets of challenges, especially their lack of quarterback succession since Drew Brees. It's been a revolving door. Derek Carr was not the answer. I'm not necessarily swayed that anybody on the roster right now is either. And I think, going back to what we talked about yesterday with Dan Pizzuta, how he's like, they might be fun at times, but the Saints could be in for a bit of a rough year. And I do think what he means by fun is I'm not sure what to expect New Orleans on defense. They might give up a lot of yards and not be particularly good on defense. But with Kellen Moore, you expect to have a little bit of offensive flair and some, a little razzle-dazzle with the offense. So ultimately, I'm going to be curious to see what happens with New Orleans, simply because I'm a guy who likes what I've seen from Kellen Moore as a coach so far. And again, ultimately, former Oregon and Texas Tech quarterback Tyler Shaw ends up second string. Spencer Rattler, the former South Carolina Gamecock, is named starting quarterback. Let's hear from Kellen Moore first, talking about Tyler Shuck's development, the former Duck and Red Raider.
We're really, really fortunate. We got Tyler. Love the development that he's had over the course of this entire offseason. He's done a number of things for the first time in his career, just navigating that. And I think that's an important aspect when you're a younger quarterback, to let the whole process play itself out. I'm a big believer in just the importance of developing quarterbacks, developing them the right way. There's a process for both of these guys, give them the space to develop, and we think we got two guys that are going to have great careers for us.
I think that's, Kellen Moore, a little coach speak there. Two guys with, quote, great careers. But I would also be remiss if I didn't mention also that Tyler Shush spent his last year at Louisville putting up career highs across the board as well. But talk about a guy that just played forever. Again, began his college career with Oregon in 2018, spent 3 years with the Ducks, spent 3 years with Texas Tech, and then a year with Louisville. Obviously not all full years this last year with Louisville was his only full season complete and healthy as a starting quarterback. So obviously good to see there from anybody. But ultimately, it was Spencer Rattler who was named the starting quarterback by Kellen Moore, and he talks about that decision.
Spencer Rattler is our starting quarterback. Really, really excited for him. He's done an awesome job this offseason. He's just been consistent, made some really good decisions throughout this whole entire process, and his ability to make plays with his arm and his feet have certainly shown up. And so I'm really, really excited about Spencer. He's earned this opportunity.
Again, former Oklahoma and South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler going to be the starter down there in New Orleans. And again, we saw a little bit of Spencer Rattler this last year. Obviously played in 7 games, 6 starts for the Saints. He went 0-6. The numbers weren't great. 50% completion rating, 1,300 yards, only 5.8 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns against 5 picks. Showed a little mobility, right? Had 8.1 yards rushing per attempt on 18 attempts, but also took 22 sacks, a lot of sack yards. It'll be interesting, right? I think other than maybe the Colts, I think the Saints have one of the more perilous quarterback situations in the NFL, and good on Kellen Moore for, being optimistic. But a part of me also wonders that, if only at the ripe age of 37, maybe Kellen Moore himself is still the best quarterback in that room. And again, no disrespect to Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shutt, but they definitely need to show it because, again, I wasn't particularly impressed with what I saw from Rattler last year, but it was only his first year, and we'll see what he'd be able to do in terms of, growing with a guy like Kellen Moore, who I think definitely can be a quarterback whisperer within reach, and as far as being a former quarterback himself. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well, but I think it's going to be a pretty rough season down in New Orleans. I think obviously you've got some of the players we all remember, the Alvin Kamaras, the Chris Olaves, some other players that have, played well for the Saints, Cam Jordan, right? Some of the big, quote, Mr. Saints. I would even throw in, I'm selfishly happy to see my guy Brandon Cooks back down with the New Orleans Saints. But for the most part, I think it's going to be a struggle for them. Also would be remiss if I didn't shout out to Talise Fuaga, who's also an Oregon State alum. And I did not intend on going down this rabbit hole, folks, but it was funny because my younger brother, Brogan, is a big-time Saints fan, and don't ask why. It still doesn't really make sense to me in a lot of ways, but it's one of those things where he's been a Saints fan for as long as I can remember now, and it's like, okay, I respect it. I don't know why, but it's just kind of there. And I told him the other day when I was writing a story for Beaver's Edge, the On3 affiliate that I'm the publisher of. You can check us out at Beaver's Edge. Just running down the NFL rosters in which Beavers made rosters yesterday. And I was like, did you know that there's not one team that has more Oregon State Beavers on the active roster than the New Orleans Saints, with 3? Wide receiver Brandon Cooks, right tackle Talise Fuaga, and defensive back Rajon Wright. So you learn something new every day. I'm not saying I'm going to be a Saints supporter for that reason alone, but nevertheless, any Oregon State fans out there, good to know that the Beavers are in numbers down there in New Orleans with Kellen Moore. So, maybe Kellen Moore just recognizes some game. But nevertheless, that was Kellen Moore. Let's go ahead and get back to a couple other things. I want to play the Dak Prescott audio one more time because, again, in case you missed it in the first hour, the Micah Parsons contract, we talked about it with Dan Pizzuta yesterday. It's one of the more fascinating contract negotiations that I've seen kind of from afar in some time. Not only, as I mentioned, did I watch that Cowboys documentary and kind of learned how Jerry and Stephen Jones handle negotiations, and they prefer to, talk to a player directly rather than necessarily work with an agent. And, that's kind of old school, but they've, got business done that way. But then you've heard there's been issues, rifts between Micah Parsons, and I think of Micah Parsons taking things out of, his bio and out of his Instagram bio or out of his X bio and all the things that you see when players are getting real passive aggressive in this process. And I think knowing what, just believing what I believe after watching the documentary, I think Jerry Jones is a genuine individual. I think he definitely picks and chooses what he wants to share and how he shares it, but I don't think he's ever straight up just like lying. So a couple days ago when he was on a podcast with Michael Irvin and he mentioned that he had given Micah the richest non-quarterback deal in NFL history, it could be a little hyperbole, but at the same token, knowing how I think, that documentary kind of underscored Jerry Jones isn't going to be around forever. And I think Jerry Jones is under some pressure to kind of build that Dallas Cowboy winning team or something that could compete, in, the later years of his career as GM and obviously life as Jerry's getting up there. So it's definitely something I'm curious to keep an eye on. And we'll go ahead and play the audio one more time. Again, here's Dak Prescott talking about how he's not really worried about the situation with Micah Parsons. And if you're Dak Prescott, leader of this Cowboy team, you want your defensive captain out there and the guy who's such a disruptor. So here's what he had to say about Micah Parsons.
No, I've got confidence. I've told y'all that well way back when, and I'm just going off of experience, honestly. No different than mine, so I've got confidence in that. Just hoping, which I know he is, he's ready to play. There's been a case of something similar to this the last 3 years, I believe. So if not before, I guess, right? Not necessarily. I think that's people can take it however they want. I think it's kind of part of the way guys think and see things around here.
Ultimately, there's some time, right? The Cowboys don't face off against the Eagles until next Thursday, a week from tomorrow. So really, you've still got time to get this done. And I think like Dan was saying yesterday, the likelihood that Jerry Jones could choose to have this be announced live on Thursday, the day that, the Super Bowl defending champ Philadelphia Eagles are going to be debuting, this season. I think that'd be quite the way for Jerry and the Cowboys and Micah Parsons to kind of steal the show, steal the thunder, so to speak. So that'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on. And ultimately, I don't think that they really have a choice. Do I think this will be like the 90s when Emmitt Smith held out for 2 games and Dallas did not look very good and all of a sudden all the negotiating power went back to Emmitt? Maybe. Micah Parsons is one of those guys who is so darn impactful, and so many other teams would be more than happy to pay that guy boatloads of money. Obviously, playing for Dallas is playing for Dallas, but it's interesting because I could also see Micah Parsons being like, I'll sit out for the first couple games, see how you guys are doing, see how much you might need me. Kind of that old adage, like you don't know how good something is until it's not out there, right? So, nevertheless, we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Portland sports writer Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive, talking some Oregon State, talking some Blazers as well. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Wednesday afternoon. Pleased to welcome back to the program our next guest. He's a longtime Portland sports writer and columnist covering the Beavers, Blazers, and more. Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Kerry, good to catch up with you again. How are things, my friend?
Doing good. How about you, Brendan? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I always appreciate getting a chance to talk some ball with you, Kerry. Things are good. Obviously, I'm a little sad that summer has kind of come to an end now. It seems like it went by real fast, but on the same token, football season is here, and I'm amped.
Yeah, we're actually, it's fun to see a few games. I don't know if you watched anything Saturday. I watched the Stanford Hawaii game, which was a pretty good game. I don't think the Cardinal fans would think it was a very good game, but it was interesting to watch Ben at quarterback there for the Cardinal, and it was a rough one for them.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I actually led into that with the show today. I said, I know the Iowa State-Kansas State game was the marquee game, but selfishly, I was all about that Hawaii-Stanford game, Kerry, because, yeah, I thought for one it was a little odd to see Bengal Branson in a different uniform, and, I kind of wanted to see how he was going to play, right? Frank Reich is there. That's an intriguing coach to an extent. Yes. Andrew Luck, the GM. But when I heard that they had announced Ben as a starter, I was like, it could be a rough year for the Cardinal. And after that loss to Hawaii, Kerry, I think I doubled down on that.
I think I saw where the over-under for them was 3.5 wins, and one of those wins was supposed to be against Hawaii. So, I'm pulling for Ben because I think he's a great kid. I'm glad that he got another chance to play college football. Here's a guy that's going to be somebody's doctor for the next 35 years. And, wonderful guy. But you're right. It's going to be a rough go for him this year, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And to be honest with you, Kerry, you got to appreciate the Bengal Branson plan. I mean, he almost had, 10 years of college paid for by now? I mean, it's smart. Absolutely genius.
How many degrees is he going to get? You're right on that.
Absolutely genius. But, again, catching up with Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Kerry, you were down at Trent Bray's press conference today. I'm curious, what was your kind of reactions from today as the Beavers officially get ready for Cal on Saturday?
Well, to say that Trent plays it close to the vest would not be doing it justice. He doesn't give away anything and didn't say a whole lot. He's obviously feels good about his group. I think Saturday's game is going to be a good one, and I know that odds makers say Beavers by 3. That means they think they're just about even because the Beavers are playing at home, and I don't think that's too wrong. Cal is. Anybody that thinks it's going to be an easy game for the Beavers, I think, has another thing coming. I think Cal's defense is going to be very strong. They've got this kid, the true freshman at quarterback that's going to start. You can pronounce his name. Don't worry about me doing that. Jaron is his first name.
Yep, we'll go with that.
But, from Hawaii, tremendous talent, I understand. So I think it's going to be a very intriguing game to watch.
Yeah, Jaron, I believe it's Sagapol was at one point, an Oregon State lean. He was at one point an Oregon lean and, eventually ended up at Cal. But, again, a true freshman. I'll be curious about that. The one thing is I wasn't able to get down there today, Kerry, but I was listening to the press conference, getting ready for this radio show. And I think the thing that kind of stood out really to me from Trent, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on, was one, he made a point to be like, I'm not saying anything that could give Cal an advantage. Yeah. And two, there were a couple questions asked about some guys' availability. Trent Bray's not going to answer those. Yeah,
I just think it's paranoia. It's ridiculous. Are you telling me that the people in Cal are not going to find out about injuries? They're going to find out, and even if they do, it's not going to make a difference in the game. So there have been other coaches. I remember Chip Kelly. He was one of the first coaches. It's a competitive disadvantage if we talk about injuries. I actually think the coaches, in the NFL, they have to. Right. There's an injury list. And I think there ought to be in college, too, because the fans want to know what's happening with the team, and they're the ones that are paying the bills for these guys to make good salaries, and now the NIL players. So right. I don't understand that paranoia.
Yeah, it's a tough, like we've said, Kerry, we've seen a lot of coaches handle it a lot of different ways, but, I'm not going to name anybody specifically, but, for example, a certain receiver that Oregon State is curious about, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, Kerry, to look at the depth chart and not see him there.
Yeah, Darius Clemens is who you're talking about. It looks like he's not going to play. And I don't know what his injury is. I just know he hasn't been in there. And, I think Trent Walker is going to be a huge part of this on Saturday. They're going to have to, and he's going to get some double coverage. And I don't think their receiving group is particularly strong or deep. So getting the ball to Trent's going to be a big deal for the Beavers.
Catching up with Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Yeah, Kerry, let's go ahead and dive right into it and start at quarterback. I mean, obviously, the one thing we can say that, no doubt, no question, Oregon State upgraded quarterback in a big way from last year with Malik Murphy. And, if you read the tea leaves, they made sure he had a pretty good offer to be here and all those things. And my question for you is, just how far can he take this squad, and what kind of return on investment do you think Oregon State will be able to get this year?
Well, I know maybe Oregon State fans aren't going to like this, but he reminds me of DJ Ungalele. Am I pronouncing that right? He was a good quarterback, and people maybe at the end kind of thought, well, you know what, he wasn't that great, but he was a darn good quarterback that got a lot of wins. So I think Malik is better than him. I think he's a better thrower. He's not a big runner, but he looks to me like he's a guy that has enough experience, and now he knows the playbook pretty well. Trent talked about that. He said, not understanding not only offense, but the reads based on what the call is. So he's going to be a strength for him. I think the strength for the team, though, is going to be running back. They've got at least three guys that are quality running backs. And if that offensive line, which to me is a question mark, if they can do their job and open some holes, the running game is going to be strong again.
Yeah, no, the running game, you mentioned it, I think that room is deep. I was looking at the depth chart today, Marcus Crosby, who I think comes below, Cornell Hatcher and Jake Reichel, I really like too. So that room is very deep, and I think, like you said, if they can get the offensive line play, they could run the ball particularly well like we've seen. I'm curious because, Kerry, you've been around the program, quite a while, and you remember when Mike Cavanaugh was here the first time. Going into, fall camp, there were obviously a lot of questions about the offensive line, but as I was kind of there checking things out over 3 weeks, it looks like they really made progress. And I go back to, when I just followed the team, when I was a kid, it seemed like all those years for Mike Riley, Mike Cavanaugh could always put together a pretty strong offensive line group.
Mike is a guy who commands respect and with tough love. And I'm sure that those kids have responded to that. You're right about he was one of the great coaches for developing kids. They'd come in as a raw freshman and 3 or 4 years later leave as an NFL player. He had several NFL players from here. And I don't know that there's any that he has on this current group, although Van Wells is their leader for sure, the center, the senior center. He's a solid player, and if he can stay healthy, he'll be a leader and important. All the rest of them to me are question marks, and I know Cav has gotten some young guys that he really likes, but they have to play now. And guys like Morano and Strand and Elu, those guys are going to have to come in and play good football for them right away.
Right, and I think just kind of going along with that, Kerry, too, we've been keeping an eye on several guys on the offensive line, but particularly Tyler Volton, who was, a starter last year, and we know at some point this year he will be back, but, that was a guy who, is easily a guard starter when he's back healthy.
Yeah, you're right, and they can use him. And I don't know. Again, we don't know when he's going to be back, so I didn't mention him because I didn't even think about him.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like reading the tea leaves now, and even more so catching up with Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Defensively, Kerry, the Beavers have some new pieces, and we've heard now why Trent Bray decided he wanted to take back over kind of the defensive coordinator. He talked about it in spring, talked about it now in fall. Why do you think, Kerry, he ultimately, after kind of 1 year of last year, decided, hey, I need to be back in charge of this?
I don't think he was pleased with the coaching, and he would not say that, but I think he believes in himself, and he has good reason to. He's a very good defensive coach, and it was best for the program. I think he missed it too, Brendan. I think, but I remember when Mike Riley gave up the play calling to Danny Langsdorff for a year or so, or maybe a year and a half, and then took it back. And it wasn't that Danny was a horrible play caller. Mike was very good at it. He enjoyed it. It kept him in the game. And I think that's the way Trent looks at it on the defensive side. He wants to keep in the game too.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely been one of those things where you look back and the proof has been in the pudding, Kerry. Ever since Jonathan Smith gave Tim Tibesar the pink sheet and put Trent Bray in that position, Oregon State's defense has been a pretty solid unit. And I think back to last year, beyond just the struggles that they had, Kerry. I don't know if I've ever seen a defense that was as injured as they were last year.
Yeah, they had a lot of injuries, and they couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback, and that's going to be a big responsibility this year, and it's a major emphasis for the defensive coaches. We're going to get some pressure on the other quarterback. I thought Nico Taylor was their very best defender last year, and he's back. I was thrilled to see him come back. I was worried that he'd take an offer somewhere else.
Sure.
He's a key. Kai Wallen, Thomas Collins, those guys in there, and then I thought Dexter Foster was a real key guy. Was he a freshman last year or a sophomore? He's a
freshman. Yeah.
So he's another guy that will need to put some pressure on the quarterback. I think if you're pinpointing them as a key and for the entire team, that defensive front, I think you're right.
And defensively, too, I'd be remiss, like Kerry was mentioned, I think Dexter Foster, obviously the pride of Portland, Oregon here, I think he's primed for a big year. And I will say this, Kerry, just last week, kind of the bummer news, the kid had a heck of a journey. I sure was disappointed to see that Micaiah Tongue was walking away from football.
Yeah. Yep, I loved his dad, too.
Yeah.
Reggie was a great guy and a great player, and I was hoping that Michaela could come in there. But, he even Trent mentioned he's had so many injuries, including to the knee, and probably just, and I think he was going to play quite a bit, too, so it is too bad. It hurts their depth a little bit, but.
Yeah, no, he was just like to that point, and I really wanted to get your thoughts on having communicated with his dad back in the day and whatnot, because Micaiah was one of the nicest kids, and you just rooted for him, right? It was one of those great stories, and to kind of see that he had another injury, just a week or so ago that put him down was disappointing to see. Again, just a couple more questions here for Kerry Eggers here on the Rip City Drive. Kerry, appreciate your time. What would you say now, just kind of not looking super, super optimistically, what are your biggest question marks for this team as we kind of approach the season?
Depth, and even though Trent said that depth is better almost everywhere, which it probably is, I think they do have some good depth at some spots. But like, for instance, what we just talked about, the defensive front, I don't think is deep. They can't get any injuries there. I think the secondary is very deep. It's a good secondary with Ayers and Skylar Thomas and Patterson and Ivy. They've got some good kids back there, but they can't afford anything in the front. And then the other part of it's the offensive line. So I guess I would say the front on both sides. I really like their skill players on offense, especially if they can get the ball to Trent Walker. Trent should get 80 catches this year. And if he doesn't, it's not working. And so we'll see. I think they'll score plenty of points. I just don't know if they can keep other teams off the board.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for me, Kerry, to see who emerges as that kind of number 2 go-to pass catcher behind Trent Walker, because we know Trent Walker can do what Trent Walker does. I mean, that was, in my opinion, pretty poor quarterback play last year, and he nearly got 1,000 yards. But, you look at, obviously, most likely not having Darius Clemens in the mix. I was kind of expecting a big season from him. I think a lot of people were. Yeah. Now you're elevating Taz Reddix, who I think has had some moments. The coaching staff has talked about it, but again, kind of unproven in a game sense. And same with, Eddie Freoff and David Wells, the rest of those receiver core. I think there's talent there, but until they consistently prove it on game days, it's kind of hard to project,
Eddie Freoff got a lot of publicity. I haven't seen him play, so it'll be interesting to see him. Physical talent, obviously, and played at a small school. So if he can step right in there as a freshman, as a true freshman, and catch 25, 30 passes and be a factor, that would be huge. You're absolutely right about that.
Continuing on here with Kerry Eggers on the Rip City Drive, the Beavers and Bears obviously played last year, Kerry, and it was a blowout for Cal. But now, just with the way the portal goes, I mean, they're two completely different teams as we enter this year. How do you think the Beavers prepare for that, knowing that, Cal has a quarterback they don't have any tape on and all those other things?
Well, Trent was asked today if there's any, motivation from last year's, thumping by Cal, and he said absolutely not. It's a totally different game, and that's true. I'm sure they're going to mention it though in their pregame talks and stuff. But you're right. I don't know. I think basically what they do, as he said, we game plan for their schemes, not the quarterback. Now this kid is a good scrambler, so they'll have to be aware that he can get away in the pocket, and don't let him get away, and don't let him run for 20 yards a couple times. But I think they'll play it pretty straight up defensively, Brandon. They will try to get to him, though. As a freshman, you're going to try to put as much pressure as you can on him. And then offensively, it'll be balanced. And I think they'll have more trouble throwing than they will running, just because it's a first game for Malik. And, again, I'm curious to see how well his receivers do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. One of the more intriguing coaching hires as far as coordinators go, Kerry, this offseason was Justin Wilcox hiring Brian Harsin, in my opinion. I mean, it might take some time for that to work out, but I think Harsin's football acumen is well better than, the kind of raw deal he got at Auburn. Cal's offense has got a different quarterback as Mendoza's gone, different running back as Jaden Ott's gone. What do you think? Curious kind of your thoughts on Cal's offense.
Well, again, the quarterback is unproven, so let's see what he does. I agree with you on Harsin. He did a great job, I thought, with his offenses at Boise. They were always well balanced. They've got about 5 running backs that they said might get some time. I'm not sure who won that job. They're all underclassmen. I'm looking at the list right now. I think there's 4 freshmen and then 2 sophomores. So we'll see. We'll see how well they run the ball. They had that kid named Grizel, I think, who had a good game against Oregon State last year. A big kid, 6'4", 205, had 5 catches for 95 against the Beavers. So he'll be a target. They got a little guy, a speedster, De Jesus, who played for UNLV last year.
Oh, yes.
So they'll have some skill players too that'll be good to. I think their strength though is going to be the defensive side.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I think back to, it's crazy to think how long Justin Wilcox has been there now, but right away, like year one, Justin Wilcox has always had that team playing competitive defensive football, regardless of how their offense looks in a given year. But just a couple more things here for you, Kerry. Oregon State's over-under this year. Vegas has got them set at 6.5 wins. Even optimistically, if they stay healthy, I could see them in that 7-8 win range. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. Anybody that says 10-2 is a little too optimistic. They're not going to beat the Ducks. They're not going to beat
Right.
Texas Tech, and they'd have to be perfect against everyone else. I think 7-8 wins is probably what I would. Now, the Cal game is huge on that. If they win that, then yes, it's very. Now, if they lose it, it's going to be harder for them to get to, say, the 8-win because they've got some other tough games. I think Houston's going to be tough. They're not probably going to beat the Cougars both games. They'll probably split on that one.
Right.
So 7-8, I agree with you. I think that's about what I would pick.
So let's switch gears a little bit here, Kerry, with our last couple minutes and talk some Blazers, as I know you're connected there. Lots of news recently, but I'm just kind of your curious thoughts on Tom Dundon's group that plans to purchase the team from the Allen estate.
Well, the thing about him is he's a guy that's going to be very, very involved, and in most ways that's good. In other ways, don't be too nitpicky. Don't get too involved with it. Let your people do their work. I've heard that he's maybe a little bit too involved. Although, look at the job he's done with the Hurricanes. I mean, they came in as a team who was perennially not a playoff team, and they've made it, 7 years in a row. So good for him. I don't know much about his group. I know he can get as many as 20 people in the ownership group. He doesn't have a tremendous amount of money for a guy that's would be the, I guess, controlling owner of a NBA franchise. But I guess they've got enough because I don't think the Blazers would, get this far if they didn't think the guy had enough money to buy him. So it's going to be a long process. This is what we're talking about now, but in another month it'll all be about the team and a new chance to, finally try to go for some wins after, having tanked 3.5 years of.
Yeah, no, and I kind of want to get your thoughts that too, Kerry, because I was actually catching up with one of my good buddies yesterday. We were talking about the Blazers a little bit, and just it seems like in my journeys over the last couple months, like when you combine Young Hansen, when you combine Dame back, when you combine, I think, the fact that a lot of fans were wanting an ownership change. It seems like there's a lot of, and maybe it's not going to lead to anything, but it's just from the fan base, it seems like there's a little bit more just energy. I don't even want to say optimism, but maybe that fans that didn't really maybe care too much during the tanking years, maybe they're back a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more excitement about the team than probably in the last 3 or 4 years. Optimism, yes, I think you could say that too. I mean, they've got some good young players. I don't know that they've got championship team players, but they've got, I mean, Avila is a player that I really like, and of course everybody likes some of the young guys that they've had. I think there's no reason to not feel that way. Again, Chauncey's going to get a chance now to show that he can coach and win, and I think that'll be fun to see if he can do that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And Kerry, you're definitely going to be number 20, right? You're going to start raising some capital, and Kerry Eggers will be like number 20. And
yeah, I plan to have a minority interest in that. I think they said I only need $20 million, so I should be able to come up
maybe
with
we could just gather all of us journalists together. We'll pool all of our many, many resources, right? Oh, gosh. No,
it's hard for me to envision.
All jokes aside, Kerry, I really appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you down at Reser on Saturday night for our nightcap. And, appreciate the time, and I'll see you on Saturday for the Oregon State game.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Rip City Drive with Kerry Eggers. Appreciate Kerry's time here on the Rip City Drive. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get more into college football and the NFL before we gear you up for hour number 3, where we'll be catching up with Beaver's Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan here on the big show. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter on a Wednesday afternoon. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday so far. Big shout out to Kerry Eggers for joining us. Last segment was a great conversation. Being able to touch base on a whole bunch of different topics with Kerry, rather. Oregon State, Blazers, so much going on right now, obviously, as we're kind of, approaching both seasons. It's interesting because, the Blazers have so much change coming to their, everything, right? You talk about Dame back. You talk about a new owner coming in. You talk about young Hansen. There's been so much optimism with the guys returning too. I mean, I think we may be out of the worst of it when it comes to the Blazers kind of long dark tunnel the last couple of years. I think we'll see this team obviously push towards contention this year, which even it just takes me back to something that I think we've missed and something that I personally, as a Blazer fan, am excited for this next year, and I'm excited to obviously have the Rip City Blazers wrap up show with you guys from Thursdays from 6 to 7. Excited to have my first solo show talking about the Blazers here on Rip City Radio. Again, Thursdays from 6 to 7 in season. I'm definitely excited for that, but just getting back to what it was when those mid 2000s or mid 2010 years with Dame, like. For example, I was in college at Oregon State from 2014 to 2018, and during that stretch, like it was some of my roommate and I's favorite things to do whenever we could scrape together enough gas money to drive up to Portland. Was back then the Trailblazers did this awesome thing called Trailblazer Student Passes, where if you were had a college email address, you could get day of discounts for like tickets that didn't have quite as many, fees, things that were geared towards, us college kids that needed a little extra help to go see the Blazers. And I remember it was really cool, regular season games, you'd get them. Like, for instance, very famously, the Valentine's Day win. Oh, gosh, what year was that? Where Kevin Durant had a 50-piece for the Golden State Warriors. The Blazers win on Valentine's Day, beat the Warriors. I remember getting tickets for that game for like $10, $15 with the student pass. My buddy and I were way up. It may have even been standing room only tickets. But I remember that so well. And I was just talking to my buddy when we were floating over the weekend. I was like, how much fun would it be for the Blazers to be back and competing like that, where it's like, maybe you don't expect them to win the championship, but just that reliability. Like all those years, we kind of knew the Blazers were going to be in the postseason. Maybe they were missing that crucial piece that took them over the top. But you tell me, folks, the last couple of years, you haven't enjoyed at least having the opportunity to go see the Blazers play playoff games at Moda Center. Like, I remember going to see them play the round or one. I don't remember which game it was. Either game 3 or game 4 against Oklahoma City. I want to say game 3 of the Western Conference Finals run in 2018-19. Obviously, that year was a lot of fun being able to go watch that playoff game. I obviously remember a couple years prior when my buddy and I sold out and definitely got tickets to the Blazers Pelicans. So who would have thought that all these years later, Jrue Holiday would be a Portland Trailblazer? Because all I can remember about that series back in 2017, folks, just nightmares of Jrue Holiday, Anthony Davis, Nikola Mirotic, Rajon Rondo turning back the clock. So definitely lots of excitement there with the Blazers. So I'm definitely excited just to see the optimism with the team and just the more conversations I've continued to have recently regarding the Blazers from various fans. It's been encouraging, and I'm definitely excited to see ultimately what they end up being this year and what it comes out to be. So all that to say, we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive coming up. When we come back, we'll be kind of diving more into college football, getting into what the big games are this weekend. We'll also circle back to some NFL audio as well, but we'll dive back into college football. There's a few more games beyond Texas, Ohio State that have really caught my eye early on that I'll be keeping an eye on. And then obviously just kind of getting ready for the start of college football this weekend. We still got another week before the NFL officially kicks off. It's, this is college football's lone weekend before the NFL joins in. in that respect, it's kind of a special weekend because, that week 1 of college football, it is special. So we'll kind of run through some other games that caught my eye this weekend and a whole lot more here on the Rip City Drive on a Wednesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter here with you. Hope everyone's having a great day. You can join the conversation, 503-248-0620. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice has accepted a 6-game suspension for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy and will start serving the suspension at the beginning of the season. He will be eligible to return in the Chiefs' Week 7 game. Elsewhere in the NFL, the Colts say they will not trade quarterback Anthony Richardson despite naming Daniel Jones starting quarterback. Sorry, Colts fans, it's going to be a rough year. Nevertheless, Chris Ballard, Colts GM, says they will not be looking to trade Anthony Richardson. Coming up here on the big show in about 20 minutes, we'll be catching up with Beavers Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan, getting the rundown from Oregon State post-practice. Trent Bray this week, everything getting you ready for Oregon State Cal. Coming up on Saturday night, you've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday so far. We'll be getting you ready for Oregon State and the Beavers with Ryan Harlan in about 20 minutes. But wanted to take a moment and continue my Blazers thought from the last segment. Again, just kind of talking about how the Portland Trailblazers could be primed for a increase in wins this year and potentially push for that play-in mix this next year. And recently, actually, as of today, ESPN did a summer forecast predicting the East and West Conference, and it's kind of a collection of NBA insiders that put that together. And they had some interesting notes on the Portland Trailblazers, so I kind of wanted to run through it. So you kind of look at the Western Conference. They've got Oklahoma City winning the West, Houston finishing number 2, Denver 3, Minnesota 4, the Clippers and Lakers at 5 and 6, respectively. And again, no surprise there. The Thunder are still probably the best team in the NBA going into next season. They then classify the play-in group, which is Golden State, Dallas, San Antonio, and Memphis. So that does round out the top 10. But interestingly enough, I when I read this and they classify the rest as the bottom 5, and I knew the Blazers, there'd be a chance they'd be in this, but they have the Blazers at number 11 in leading off kind of the bottom 5 and predict them to go 39 and 43 this next year. And again, that would be an improvement in the sense that the Blazers need to prove that they can actually, be able to get over the hump with new pieces, right? And I think this little blurb is interesting. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you guys right now. It says the Blazers have a new owner on the way. Damian Lillard is back, and Young Hansen is an intriguing rookie for a team working towards contender status. Although head coach Chauncey Billups will have his team competing with new addition Drew Holiday, the Blazers' prospects seem brighter when looking beyond this season. The West has only gotten better, and Lillard is out for the season. Portland has young talent in Denny Avdia and Shaden Sharp, and prospects to develop such as Donovan Clingan. But if the Blazers are to compete for a play-in or playoff spot, they will need Scoot Henderson to realize the potential that made him the 3rd pick in 2023. So, nevertheless, I find that kind of interesting, just considering that, looking at what the Blazers were able to do, this last season. Let's go ahead and look. They were, let's go ahead and pull it up here. That's not what we're looking for. Always got to look. Let's see here. This is classic record on the radio, folks. But again, so here we go. So Portland last season, should have this off the top of my head, but again, Portland this last season went 36 and 46 overall, an improvement from the 21-win campaign a year ago and the 33-win campaign the year prior. So this projection would only have them winning 3 more games. I think when you consider kind of the best case scenario for the Blazers this year, there's obviously a chance that there's room for improvement. Like I think Drew Holiday, swapping him out for Anthony Simons, going to make the team's defense even better than what we saw during that stretch post All-Star break. Donovan Clingan, Young Hansen should be a fine center rotation. I think, giving those guys runway and playing time with DA not being around. anymore. And then, we'll see what we get from Robert Williams. But obviously, we've kind of heard we don't know what to expect there, right? There hasn't been much to expect the first couple years, so we'll kind of see. But nevertheless, they also, they list Portland as being the marquee team out of Portland, Sacramento, Phoenix, New Orleans, and Utah. And again, that's kind of the, quote, bottom 5 in this case. But you look slightly above them at 10, they've got the Grizzlies projected to go 42-40, the Spurs 44-38, Golden State 48-34, and Dallas at 44. So it's kind of interesting that the Blazers are right kind of in that mix for the play-in, at least based on what these, ESPN NBA insiders think preseason. I would say I think they're probably in a better shape than that. Depends on how, everything comes together. Like the story said, does Scoot Henderson pop? And I think there's a chance, he could be even better this year, especially improving the defensive part of his game by having Jrue Holiday in the mix. Is this the year that we finally see Shaedon Sharpe come in to be that consistent, reliable, two-way threat that we think he can be? Obviously, I think back to this last year, Chauncey Billups puts him on the bench. His defense improves and was playing some pretty darn good basketball down the stretch, and he's obviously going to be most likely playing out the final year of his contract before restricted free agency if the Blazers and he don't come to an extension, as Sean Highkin and I were discussing yesterday. But there's some what ifs, right? Like, does Denny Avdia continue his progression from really that second half on? Like, if Denny Avdia is closer to a 20 points per game score than like a 12-13, that's a big difference, right? Like we talked about with Sean yesterday, what does Toumani Camara have to do to kind of be even more developed on the offensive side of the ball, right? We already know Toumani Camara is an all-NBA level defensive player, earning all-defensive nod this last year. But if he can become more of that true 3-and-D, I mean, this last year I think he showed some good things, but if he can be even more consistent as an offensive player, I think that's going to make him into even more of a dynamic wing for the Blazers. So there's your wings. And then obviously Donovan Clingan. I think Donovan Clingan getting to start as much as he did last season down the stretch once DA had the calf strain and it was basically Clingan's season for the rest of the year. I think that was huge for him. And I think getting into that kind of 82-game NBA playing shape, I think the Blazers like what they see from Donovan Clingan. And then beyond him, it's how much are we going to see the Young Hansons show this year, which I am beyond excited for. Obviously, Young Hansen is, a very dynamic, player from the center position. He brings a lot to the table as far as, being able to pass the ball, great decision making, all those kind of things as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where this Trailblazer team is this year. Obviously, no Dame this year, but like Chauncey Billups was telling Sean Highkin, it's almost like having another assistant coach, considering what Dame's going to be able to provide as being a leader, a guy on the bench, someone that is as, iconic with Portland and synonymous with Portland as, the Maiden Organ sign at this point. So the vibes are just tremendously better from the Trailblazers. And I'd be curious if anybody out there, again, 503-248-0620, if you want to give us a call, if anybody has kind of had that same thought as they've kind of had conversations with their buddies or anything else talking Blazers this summer, because that's one of the things that's caught my eye has been the Trailblazers, just having better vibes. People are more excited for the start of the season. I think we might be through kind of the long, dark tunnel, so to speak, as far as, being able to tank for the draft picks and kind of, look for the high draft picks. I think the players and pieces are kind of in place now. We just kind of have to see how they develop, how they fit, and ultimately how we see Chauncey Billups and Joe Cronin push this roster more towards contention. So nevertheless, be very interesting, and I'll be curious to kind of get ready for the Blazers season. And again, for more Blazers talk as we get close to the season, starting once the season gets underway, you can catch the Blazers wrap-up with your boy, Brendan Slaughter, right here on Rip City Radio from 6 to 7 p.m. Let's go ahead and switch gears a little bit here. Just in about 10 minutes, we'll be catching up with Beaver's Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan. Ryan works for Beaver's Edge, an Oregon State On3 affiliate covering the Beavers. He was at Trent Bray's press conference on Monday, the offensive availability yesterday, and the defense availability today. Want to get his thoughts on Malik Murphy, the group, ultimately how tough of a game it's going to be against Cal, and maybe where his early thoughts are right now. So that'll be coming up in a few minutes, but let's go ahead and circle back to some of the college football games that I wanted to mention that were also intriguing to me. beyond just Texas, Ohio State in the top 25. Not a ton of other marquee top 25 matchups in college football in week 1, but one I had to shout out the Long Island University Sharks taking on Florida down in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. Shout out Travis Demers. Know he's going to be pulling for Long Island U in that game. Probably going to be a pretty wide Florida victory in that game, but that caught my eye, as well as LSU Clemson in the afternoon window. Tigers coming jokes on Brendan there. The LSU Tigers come in at number 9 in the country. The Clemson Tigers come in at number 4. An absolute battle of the Tigers. It's in Clemson. And this Dabo versus Brian Kelly, like this is going to be an exciting game. And obviously this is the marquee afternoon game, 4:30 p.m. on ABC. So we'll see ultimately who comes out on top there. Very close on the point spread as well. Clemson coming in as just a 3.5-point favorite. Elsewhere in college football top 25 action, that kind of rounds it out as far as ranked teams, except for Sunday, which we have a pair of Sunday games with ranked teams. The most notable, Notre Dame and Miami. Dare I say we running back the Catholics versus the convicts. Oh, man, Notre Dame, Miami always seem to be just great games. And you go back to the history, the 30 for 30s that have been made for it, and you've got Mario Cristobal obviously going up against Marcus Freeman down in Miami. I was particularly impressed with Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame last year and their run that they made. Be very interesting to see where the Fighting Irish are this next year as we get as they get ready for their schedule. And then Miami, obviously, without Cam Ward, they come in at number 10, Notre Dame at number 6. Despite being on the road, the Fighting Irish come in as a 2.5-point favorite in that matchup. And then the other game of note on Sunday, Virginia Tech and South Carolina will be at the Falcon Stadium on Sunday as well. So I kind of like some college football Sunday games. I recall a couple years ago, it wasn't necessarily the most marquee game, but a few years back, 2023, Oregon State and San Jose State squared off on a Sunday, and they had that game on Paramount Plus and on CBS, kind of nationally televised. And you know the opportunity to be one of, especially in week 1 with no NFL, the opportunity to have some college football games on Sunday, it's not nothing. And I think we should honestly embrace more of it. And I think, 2 games, I'm like, why not add a few more, especially that first week when the NFL doesn't own Sundays yet, folks. You definitely got to take advantage of it. So a couple other games that are of teams of note. Arizona State, preseason number 11. They face Northern Arizona. Texas Tech, a future opponent, Oregon State. They take on Arkansas Pine Bluff. So there's lots of, casual watching if you're a fan of other teams. And then the Thursday night game this week as far as top 25, kicking off tomorrow, Boise State and South Florida. Early kickoff, 2:30 p.m. for us here on the West Coast. The Broncos 5.5-point favorites going down to Raymond James to take on the USF Bulls. So college football's here, folks. Week 0 is just a taste, and we're going to be kicking it off tomorrow. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Beaver's Edge writer Ryan Harlan, getting his thoughts on everything Oregon State. Keep it locked right here on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great Wednesday, getting you guys ready for week one of the college football season coming up, starting tomorrow, but really getting into the action on Saturday. Pleased to bring on to the program our next guest, my colleague, Beaver's Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan here on the Rip City Drive. Ryan, what's going on, my friend? How are things?
Good, Brendan. Thank you for having me on. A little chaotic with the current move I'm undertaking right now, and in addition to prepping for Saturday, and excited for week one of the season to start. I mean, football's here, so can't complain.
No, I'm definitely excited, Ryan. I was actually telling a couple of my other guests this week, like, this is my favorite and worst time of the year because it kind of pulls me from both directions. Because on one hand, you've got football starting, right? You've got college this weekend, even though we already had a taste of week 0. Then you got NFL starting, and I say football is maybe the best time out of the year. But at the same token, it means summer is over as we're here in August 27th. The summer, Ryan, seemed to just fly by this year. So I'm kind of like torn on both sides. But I think once we get into college football season on Saturday, I'll be more than ready to go. But I do miss that summer is quite fast ending.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the saying goes, right? You sleep in July, but in reality, this time around, not this time with Oregon State athletics this past season. So it's new year, it's new chapter, and yeah, just gotta take the journey as it goes, the ebbs and flows of football season, and then you go from there.
Absolutely. And again, if anyone's checking out, you can check out Ryan's coverage at beaversedge.com and On3 affiliate. We've got wall-to-wall coverage of everything Oregon State there. If you're an Oregon State fan, definitely want to check it out. Also, you can jump on the message boards, talk to Ryan, I, and our entire staff. But Ryan, you obviously have been at Trent Bray's press conference on Monday, the offense availability on Tuesday, and then the defense today. Let's just start with kind of the general vibe from the team as they kind of approach Cal. I think throughout fall camp, you and I kind of maintained that this team has a real business-like approach to the start of the season. Are you still kind of seeing that as we get ready for the Bears?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this team is excited to get out there and start playing football against somebody else that's not themselves in practice. And I think that's definitely, from talking to the players both today and yesterday, that's definitely the sense that I kind of get from them. Like, they're ready to go out there and on Saturday at Research Stadium, take on Cal. And then Trent Bray in particular is like, yep, it's another game week. And, you know, last year doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any significance on how we're going to approach Cal this time around. It's an entirely new team that we don't know what that team is going to be for the Bears until they step out on the field at 7:30. I mean, entirely brand new roster for the most part. You're starting a true freshman at quarterback, true freshman at safety, and even possibly a true freshman linebacker. So there's a lot of different pieces there to where it's like that has no result. And then obviously the same, you know, on Oregon State's side, where there are also new pieces as well too that are in there, where, you know, just because, you know, you see what you see a year ago in film study doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do a lot of those things that they did last year. Some similar concepts, yes, but definitely I think more of a, like, yeah, let's get ready to go out there and play some football on Saturday kind of mentality from this group.
Absolutely. Catching up with Ryan Harlan here on the Rip City Drive. Again, you can catch Ryan's coverage at beaversedge.com. But Ryan, let's kind of dive into a couple things that were key that we reported on this week that we were able to confirm, and that was a couple guys making public their injury statuses, and one was, unfortunately, Darius Clemens with an Achilles injury. The other was TJ Crandall with a foot injury. Both guys have made that public this week, and let's just start on the offensive side with Darius. You know, now that it's kind of out there and we can kind of break it down a little bit more, Ryan, how big is it to lose someone that you and I kind of pegged to be a go-to number 2 receiver this year?
Oh, no, it's a huge loss. Like, immediately when Darius went down, the entire air out of the stadium where they were practicing, just got sucked out immediately. Everybody was silent. Like, so that kind of tells you the significance of that and of that injury in the moment. And for a guy like Darius, who's pegged to have a big season this year, I mean, it's it's even worse because for a guy that, flashed some potential at the end of last year, being able to carry that over, finally have a full off season of being able to be healthy up until that Achilles injury, it's brutal. And now you're kind of going into the season kind of similar to a year ago where, you have Trent Walker locked in as your number one, but now you're kind of playing musical chairs to a degree of who's going to be that wide receiver 2 and then wide receiver 3. Luckily, though, Eddie Freoff, Malachi Durant, a couple names in that receiver room have stepped up and have had really good fall camps. So they should be able to pick up the production that Darius leaves behind now being injured in that offense. And that's something where I think it's going to be a little bit of figuring that out by committee to a degree, at least maybe early on in the season as to who will step up opposite of Trent Walker. But it's a huge loss because now, you're kind of trying to figure out before you play a game on Saturday, who's your best starting 11 out there. And Darius was one of them for sure. And that's something there where I think it's a really big loss for this group in terms of pass catchers. And luckily, I think had this, injury happened like later on, without having guys like Malachi or Eddie having the camps that they did, I think you would feel a little less confident in this group. But the fact that those guys have kind of stepped up and have shown that they're ready for a more of an extensive role, I think that kind of mitigates some of those feelings and lessens the impact of the loss of Darius in this offense.
Catching up with Ryan Harlan. He's a senior writer for BeaversEdge.com. Switching gears, let's talk a little bit about the Crandall injury too, Ryan, as that's something we reported on Beavers Edge last night as he made that post public. Obviously, I'm kind of curious where you think he would have projected in. I mean, I don't know if he necessarily would have been a starting corner, but based on how Oregon State's depth chart came out to be with Jaleel Tucker earning one of the cornerback nods, I think it's very plausible that he could have been a starting cornerback this year for the Beavers. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think once after TJ Crandall went down and then, seeing Jaleel Tucker get an extended look with the ones in fall camp, I think that kind of told me looking at it that TJ Crandall was expected to slot in opposite of Exodus Ayers, so be that cornerback 2. But now, I think it's more of a next man up mentality for this group, and this group in general overall in terms of depth and versatility and skill set, I think they're able to weather a loss like that. But for Crandall's role, I think that was definitely where he was probably going to slot in at when it came to the final depth chart itself, had he not suffered a broken foot, which he confirmed last night. And that's where I think where that's also kind of, it hurts that room because you're losing a guy with valuable experience starting at Colorado State and West Virginia, of course. But for him, though, he could obviously return at some point later on down the line. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to immediately come back, but he could potentially be able to be back sooner than obviously Darius is with his injury. But that's something there where I think this group can weather that very, very effectively. And talking with Coach Cooper today, secondaries coach, that's what he was kind of getting at. There's a lot of, with his position group, it's very deep, very versatile. Guys can, you kind of mix and match, plug and play guys, and you're not going to see any real drop off in production, I think. And that secondary group, I think, is going to be arguably one of, if not the strengths of the defense this year.
Catching up with Ryan Harlan from Beavers Edge here on the Rip City Drive, getting you ready for Oregon State and Cal, 7:30 p.m. on Saturday night. Ryan, a couple more things for you as we kind of go along. We've now seen an entire spring and a fall from Malik Murphy, and we got a chance to catch up with Malik yesterday and today here on the Rip City Drive. And, there's lots of things to like about Malik Murphy, Ryan, and I think kind of the comparison that's gotten thrown out there is like, oh, he'll just kind of be what DJU was for Oregon State a couple years ago. And I've seen that comparison thrown out there quite a bit. But to me, I think he's kind of his own unique self. He brings something different to the table. And I think, bottom line, Oregon State fans are going to be very pleased compared to what they had at quarterback last season.
Oh, I would agree on that. And I think the comparison is maybe more of, oh, hey, you bring in a high-level talent
Sure.
into that quarterback room where, you think you're just a quarterback away. And that's where I think for that 2022 team going into 23, bringing in DJU was like, oh, we're a quarterback away from taking that next step. And I think that's kind of the mindset for this. But what Malik does that I think is different than what DJ brought at the quarterback position is, yes, Malik has the arm talent, but he's able to not only throw it deep, but be able to provide passes with a lot of touch and be able to run an offense where it's, like Gundy said, of like driving the bus, basically, where he doesn't have to do too much. He just has to get the ball out on time and keep the offense on schedule. And that's something where I think if you look at his tape from last year at Duke, like that's something there where I think he really thrives in that kind of role. And being able to not only, chuck the deep ball, but also being able to just hit those layups, which I think something at times that DJU struggled with a little bit in 23, but just I think overall, like not only from what Malik can do on the field, I think off the field, leadership speaks volumes for a guy who came in January during winter term, and being able to be named a captain is a very good vote of confidence for what Malik will bring in terms of leadership to that room, in addition to what he brings on the field as well. So that's something there where I think, if you're, a Beaver fan and you're kind of wondering what Malik looks like now after you got a first kind of glimpse at him in spring, I think you're going to be very pleased, and I think you're going to be very surprised by just the growth overall, because that was something that I kind of noticed was just his grasp of the offense and what's asked of him on every single play. Like, he still looked good in spring, like pretty solid overall, but like taking that next step and getting more comfortable in the playbook, you could really see it throughout fall camp, and I think it's only going to get better from there as you actually get into a game environment and be able to figure out what works, what doesn't, and kind of tailor the offense to not just what Malik does really good at, but also the guys around him as well.
Absolutely, and just kind of moving along with it, Ryan. One of the key areas that I think you and I and many others were concerned about going into the year for Oregon State was the offensive line, and when that depth chart came out to be just kind of one surprise from your and I perspective, with Ryan Berger winning the left guard job over Keon Cox and some others. But I'm kind of curious how you think that unit's going to hold up, because now that I've had some time, Ryan, to kind of dive into it, Cal's defensive line and edge rushers is going to present some challenges for the Beavers on Saturday.
Oh, yeah, and I think, too, that what that group, I think, needs to show is being able to not only give Malik time in the pocket, but also be able to open up lanes in the running game as well. Against the front, that's, different from facing Trent Bray's front in practice every single day. I think the improvement in the growth is there of having a consistent starting five along that offensive line where, guys are clearly more comfortable with each other. But I think it's now just being able to see, can they translate practice over into an actual game? Because that's really the next big step, I think, for this group, and being able to show that despite kind of what was going on at the start of spring, there is, more of a, I would say, more of a sense of improvement from just kind of where they were at to now, where I think you want to see that growth just in a game environment more than anything. But Yeah, you have some well-known commodities as well at the tackle spots too, in Jacob Strand and Tyler Morano. So, albeit they've not had some game action in a while, but like I think if this group can protect Malik and be able to keep running lanes open for Anthony Hankerson and the rest of the running backs behind him, I think this group is going to be in a good spot, and then only will get stronger as you get guys back healthy like Tyler Bolton and Dylan Skorsky.
Absolutely, and there's always the possibility that there's still internal development too, and to that point, I mentioned it earlier in the week, Brian, when I had Kerry Eggers on the program, and I was like, for how long like Coach Cav has been around, and even was something I mentioned to Trent Bray when we had him on, is like Coach Cav has been Coach Cav for so long, he has the experience. Despite there being some new faces, I still feel pretty confident in his ability to put 5 guys together who can be effective because he's done it for such a long period of time.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I think a lot of Beaver fans should have confidence in, is just the track record that Cav has had as an offensive line coach and being able to do it at such a high level. Like, Cav talking to us in fall and spring kept it straight and saying, yeah, this group is a work in progress, but here's the thing, I want to get that 5 set, and maybe they may not be the same 5 that come later on in the season, week 6, week 7. But if I have 5 guys out there that I can trust to go protect Malik, I'm comfortable with that group, and I'm going to stand behind those guys when we open up the season.
Let's switch gears a little bit, Ryan, with our last few minutes and talk a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. I really want to zero in on the defensive line. And, Ryan, obviously Trent Bray doesn't really talk much about injuries and those kind of things. But in case you heard on Monday, I kind of asked him, I was like, was last season one of the more injured seasons that you had? And he kind of chuckled a little bit and was just kind of like, yeah, kind of felt that way. And I think that's about as much as he wanted to kind of like talk about it. But just going back to last year, Ryan, how much was this defense playing with a below average deck, so to speak, just with so many guys that were inexperienced, so many guys that were injured and not in the mix? Like, it's almost night and day in terms of personnel and depth this year.
Well, yeah, definitely something that I think for the defensive line was a point of emphasis to go out and address after last season. I mean, when you have to bring over Andy Alfieri and Dylan Sikorsky to the defensive side of the ball, like, you're in dire straits to a degree. And when you miss 5 defensive linemen to start the year for a multitude of reasons, you're playing from behind the 8 ball pretty much. And I think I was looking through that with orange-colored glasses and thought, it's not going to affect them until probably later on in the year where, the wear and tear of a season will get to you. And like, nope, it showed up right away. But for that group, they went out and grabbed guys from the portal, Tajay Mullix, Walker Harris, Kai Wallen, shored up that line. And I know people might look at them like, well, they added Kai Wallen, Walker Harris, and a couple other pieces, but it's largely the same group. Like, how can we be sure, this group is improving? And to that I say yes, but I think the comfortability and the understanding that these guys have in the system in year 2 and being able to improve upon that year, I think only benefits them rather than kind of hinders them. And I'm like, yeah, last year was last year, but this group is arguably head and shoulders above where they were a year ago. Even in fall camp, they're ahead of where they were a year ago. So that's something there where I think this group can be very much better. I mean, when you're, only have 7 sacks in total,
right,
as a defensive line, like, only way to go from there is up. But that's the thing. Like, you're throwing in a bunch of guys into the mix, and guys getting an understanding of what it means to play a significant amount of snaps at the D1 level in college football. And then also for this group as well, like, I think you can easily now rotate guys in and out along that defensive line. You don't need to have Tavita Pomey or Nico Taylor play almost 100% of the snaps on defense because you're so thin. I think you can save guys, you can rotate them and keep them fresh and be able to get after the quarterback more effectively. So I think this group can be better. It's also like the offensive line where you're going to probably see how good they are on Saturday. It's just translating what you see in practice now into a game. And if they're able to do that, then I think any concerns or any, kind of apprehensiveness about where the defensive line is at, I think will probably go away from week one.
Absolutely. And kind of going along with that, too, catching up with Nico Taylor today, Ryan, you could just tell from, just ask him. As I asked him, I'm like, how excited are you to be back as an edge rusher in Trent Bray's most likely more aggressive defense this year? And he was like, oh, man, like he was pumped. And I think that's a part of it, too, Ryan, because we've kind of talked about it. Without Trent Bray kind of leading that mix last year, the defensive just, I don't even want to say necessarily alignment, but just overall kind of the way they played was just slightly different than what we'd gotten used to under Trent Bray the last couple of years.
Well, yeah, and I go back every time to what Simon Sandberg, former Oregon State defensive lineman, said when Bray first took over was the defensive style that Bray brings allows players on that side of the ball to just play and play fast, be aggressive, not have to think too much in their responsibilities of what they're doing every single play. And I think that's something there where you see that when Bray is out there, they kind of take on the energy that Bray has in practice. And for those that don't know, Bray is very high energy in practices. He's sprinting up and down that sideline. Like, he's going after loose balls. Like, that's kind of where this kind of group is. And when they adopt that mentality that Bray has, and you can tell guys were excited when Bray took back the reins of the defense. And even to Bray saying, like, yeah, I'm not a CEO. I like to coach. I like to be a part of it. And when the defense isn't looking the way that he wants it to look, it's now a matter of, okay, now I have to step in and make it look the way I want it to be versus having to give the reins over to somebody else and kind of be that role, be that CEO kind of role as a head coach. And I think for Bray and being able to bring in Rob Akey and Mark Kreiner to handle some of those responsibilities only benefits Bray being able to balance both of those duties together. And I think you'll see a much more aggressive defense than last year by far. And that's something there where, I think, both you and I probably have noticed it last year too, where it just kind of looked not quite right. Like there was always something missing, and it was the Bray's fingerprints on it and the intensity at which the defense plays. That's what was really missing from last year. And I think this group now has both of those things and going to be kind of back to where they were in 23 and 22 in terms of playing style on that side of the ball.
Absolutely. Catching up with Ryan Harlan here on the Rip City Drive. Last thing for you, Ryan. Obviously, when we started the week, Oregon State opened up against Cal as a 3-point favorite. That's now trimmed down to 1.5 as we approach the season opener, which really, when you consider what the odds makers usually give for home field advantage, this is as true of like a coin toss 50-50 game. Obviously, I'll be encouraging everyone to read your prediction at Beaver's Edge later in the week. But what are your early thoughts on this game? Because I think it's going to be a tough but really, really good contest between two teams. What do you think?
I'm in that mindset as well, too. And I think that's probably about right in terms of where this group is at, in terms of, where both sides are, especially for Oregon State. Like, you kind of don't know what these teams are going to be until you go out there and play. Right. So the coin flip feels kind of right. If I had to kind of lean one way or another, at least right now, just because there's so many question marks around Cal in terms of the offseason moves, the losses, the additions in the transfer portal, and two, of bringing in a true freshman quarterback to start week one on the road and it being a night game. I would lean Oregon State, but it's probably not by much. If I had to kind of give sort of an idea of where I'm kind of leaning in terms of who would win on Saturday, And that's just more of a, like, it's not doubting talent from Cal. It's not doubting talent from Oregon State either. I think it's truly anybody's game. And we'll find out what both these teams are, when we get under the lights on Saturday night.
Absolutely, and you can catch him at beaversedge.com, Ryan Harlan. You can also find him on X at Ryan_7, or Ryan Harlan or Ryan_Harlan7. Couldn't get that out, Ryan, but you can find him there on X and obviously at beaversedge.com. Ryan, really appreciate the conversation today. You and I will continue talking, obviously, and the fine folks can find your work at beaversedge.com. Really appreciate the time today, my friend.
No, appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Ryan Harlan, you can find him at beaversedge.com. Also can catch him on the Edge podcast over at beaversedge.com with me as well. We'll have a new episode out tomorrow for all Oregon State fans. We'll take a quick break on the Rip City Drive. We'll put a bow tie on the show when we come back. Definitely need to take a moment and recognize our Thank a Teacher promotion. Today's teacher of the day is John Lyon, who teaches at David Douglas Arthur Academy in Portland, and we are told he is an amazing PE teacher. The students love him. He's always finding ways to keep them happy and interested, and this school has no gym. The students and teachers are out in the weather all year during PE class. He goes out of his way all year, even when school's not in session, to help out. On his days off, he gets the garbage and recycle out for pickup. If an alarm goes off at the school during the night, he's always there to help as needed. He deserves this award. Congrats, John Lyon. You're in the running to win $5,000 for your classroom. Thank a Teacher promotion here at Rip City Radio 620 and iHeartRadio. Welcoming you back into the final segment of Rip City Drive here on a Wednesday afternoon. Hope everyone's had a great show so far. Big thanks to our guests today, including Oregon State quarterback Malik Murphy, outside linebacker Nico Taylor, Kerry Eggers, and Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com. Awesome conversations today. A couple other things we'll kind of preview tomorrow's show as well. We've got a jam-packed lineup for you guys. We're going to have TJ Matthewson from the Marine Layer podcast talking some Mariners and Cal Raleigh at 3:20. Cam Meller talking some college football at 4:20, and then Mike Doc Parker talking more Oregon State at 5:20. So definitely stay tuned in for tomorrow's show.